There we go. So welcome. My name is Molly Johnston Heck. I am the Regional Farmland for a New Generation Manager here at American Farmland Trust and one of the folks who helped to organize this project that we're going to talk about today. So I am going to start by just setting the stage a little bit for who we are and how we came to work on this project, which was funded, I want to mention, by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. So it was funded by a grant through that program. And Alex, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So I want to start with just who AFT is and what our mission is. So our mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farm practices, and keeping farmers on the land. And here in New York, we have a program called Farmland for a New Generation New York. You can go to the next slide. This is a statewide program through which we administer the New York Farmland Finder website. We provide technical assistance directly to farmers and landowners, and we coordinate a network of other service providers to do the same, all with the goal of supporting farm seekers in their search for land, as well as farmland owners in making their land available and keeping land in farming. And so collectively here at AFT, we have this great experience working with farmland seekers and farmland owners around the state, but primarily until this point in rural areas. And so I want to share a little bit of data before we jump into the urban ag piece about farmland and some of the work that AFT has done over the years to sort of think about farmland loss and kind of frame one of the problems that we're facing here. Next slide. So as you can see here, New York has over 9 million acres of farmland, 54% of which is nationally significant. So we have great farmland, which is a good thing. However, if you go to the next slide, you can see that between 2001 and 2016, over 250,000 acres have been lost or fragmented. And half of this was our best land for growing food, so that nationally significant land. We do have a really robust farmland protection program here in New York State, but it still only protects about 4% of our total farmland acreage. Next slide. And if we look to the future, so this was a study that actually came out this year. It's called Farms Under Threat, and Alex can share the link in the chat here. But if we look to the future over the next, 15 years or so, this is the business as usual scenario that we've projected, which is, saying that we would lose almost another 500,000 acres of farmland if we continue with business as usual. So, farmland loss is a really big problem. Development pressure is really impacting land here in New York State. And then, if you go to the next slide as well, sorry. This problem is further compounded by the fact that New York farmers are aging. So you can see here that nearly a third of New York farmers are over the age of 65, and then actually nearly a third are between 55 and 65 as well. So, so a lot of land stands to be is vulnerable to being lost in the next several years, and this is a challenge that we're sort of working on holistically here at AFT, and kind of sets the stage for this project a little bit. You go to the next slide. So then sort of the other side of the coin here is that when we work with farmland seekers, there are tons of challenges that those folks are facing, as well in terms of accessing land. So we are seeing that affordability is a really big problem in terms of purchasing farmland and renting farmland, that insecure tenure is a huge problem. Farmers are facing short-term leases, really don't have security in their businesses or their operations. People cite access to land and access to capital as the #1 challenge that new farmers face as they're trying to establish their businesses. So access to capital is really challenging. People need money for infrastructure. They have really high student loan debt, and many folks are facing systemic racism and discrimination. In addition, I think we all know that access to markets is a really big challenge. And so, systems that aggregate food, process food, transport, all of that good stuff are really not necessarily easy to come by here in the state. So we're getting more inquiries from urban farmers looking for land. And like I said, a lot of our work in the past has dealt primarily with rural farmers, and a lot of these urban farmers identify as Black or Indigenous or farmers of color, and come from historically and currently marginalized communities where barriers to land and capital are even greater. So in order to support some of these urban farmers that we have been hearing from and have been reaching out, we really needed more information, and so do our partners. So urban land access looks really different than rural land access, and so we sort of set out to create this planning project to be able to gather some more information. And we know from our work with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Oneida County, and some other folks in central New York that Oneida County has these really vibrant, diverse communities. In Utica alone, over a quarter of the population is made up of immigrants and refugees who are bringing farming traditions from around the world to Oneida County. And so we know that there's a lot of potential for the urban-rural connection, that many folks are already gardening and farming, and even more are really excited to learn and jump in. And so that leads us to this project. So this is just a map of Oneida County to give some context for where we are in time and space. So this kind of lays out a little bit of what the current agricultural land is, active versus vacant. You can see that, the two cities in Oneida County, Rome and Utica, are surrounded by great farmland. The farmland kind of comes right up to the city limits. And so we're really interested in looking at the county, sort of the interaction between urban and rural. If you go to the next slide. So this project really was divided into 4 pieces, 4 parts. We set out to inventory farmland needs. So that includes a survey of urban-based farmers and gardeners, as well as a series of community listening sessions. The second objective was to identify farmland. So that includes a survey of farmland owners and a map, several maps of viable land in the county and in the areas specifically directly around Utica and Rome. And then the third piece was to assess policies and programs that impact land access and food access. So we worked to create policy assessment tools and policy recommendations for the state, the county, and the 2 cities. And then finally, where we are right now is we're sharing findings. So we developed an opportunity assessment that sort of summarized a lot of what we learned from this project to be able to share publicly, and we committed to sharing that. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're holding this webinar. So you go to the next slide, Alex. I want to just mention that in order to do all of this, we had some really wonderful partners that we worked with over the course of 2 years on this project. So we worked on the first part of the project in terms of the surveying of farmers and gardeners. We worked with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Oneida County. For the second phase of the project, with surveying landowners and mapping farmland, we worked really closely with Tug Hill Tamara Land Trust. And then for the third piece of the project, the policy piece, we worked really closely with Pace University, the Haub School of Law, both the Farm and Food and Farm Business Law Clinic, as well as the Land Use Law Center, and in collaboration also with some students from Yale School of the Environment. So I just wanted to call out those folks. Many of them are on the call today, and this is, if we were in person, I would have you stand up and take a bow or wave your hand or something like that. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we worked really closely with all these folks who just contributed tremendously to the project. And the other piece, if you go to the next slide, is that we also worked with an advisory group. And so these folks here, again, several of whom are on the call today, really provided input along the way at every step. So every version of the survey, every version of maps, we really got input from a lot of different people in Oneida County, and just are really grateful for their support and their input. And next slide. Finally, I just wanted to also note that, we tried to be as inclusive as we could in terms of language accessibility with this project. We really tried to focus on listening to the needs of urban residents without any sort of preconceived notions of what urban agriculture means to different people. And so one of the things that was really challenging in the beginning was sort of defining our terms. So what I put up here is just the 2 definitions of urban agriculture that are provided by the USDA, which is the funding entity for this project. And so in both of these, you'll notice, I won't read them because I don't think I need to, but they both identify sort of urban and suburban agriculture, and it's sort of hard to define where urban agriculture ends and rural agriculture begins. And so I just want to call out that like it's really challenging to define urban agriculture. And so a couple of the places that we focused in our language was really to refer to focus on people. So we really refer to urban-based farmers and gardeners, so folks who are based in the city, regardless of where they want to farm. So we noted that, you know, many people in urban areas are open to farming in rural areas because, especially in the city of, in the county, those areas can be very accessible. So we focused on the people and kind of like what their needs were. And then also we really wanted to be inclusive of sort of the motivations for farming and gardening. So oftentimes farming can be defined by whether somebody has a business or not. And so we really try to be open and inclusive of the fact that different people are farming and gardening for different reasons, to feed their families, for medicine, to donate to their community, perhaps for a business as well, or some combination of all of those things, or including, you know, education for their communities and things like that. So I just wanted to like note that there's a lot of conversation among our advisors as well as the partners about what language to use in this project. And you'll hear some of that over and over again, the urban-based farmers and gardeners, the fact that we say growing crops and raising livestock, that we, you know, use both farming and gardening a lot. So just sort of setting the stage. And then that's it for me. I'm gonna actually pass it over to Alex, who's gonna really dig into that first objective of identifying farmland needs in the county.
All right, thanks, Molly. So everyone just bear with me a little bit as I'm doing the slides and presenting at the same time. So I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly. I am Alexandra Morency. I am the New York Regional Program Coordinator for American Farmland Trust. Mostly what I do in my role is I really work on any project that's kind of related to farmland access, transfer, and sometimes conservation as well. And focused on New York State, kind of under our umbrella of the Farmland for a New Generation New York program. So Molly previously mentioned that our first objective was to inventory urban farmers and gardeners. So we did this kind of through two methods. The first was that we did this survey. The second was that we held listening sessions kind of in the communities of Utica and Rome. So the Urban Farmer and Gardener Survey, it was available online and in printed format. And then we translated it into 6 different languages. And these languages we determined based on feedback from our advisory group, and then also just our partners and other people that are boots on the ground in this region. So we chose Burmese, Karen, Arabic, Spanish, Somali, Ukrainian, and English. So Molly kind of touched on this briefly, but I just wanted to reiterate that you're going to hear me say farmers and gardeners a lot. So those are the terms that we decided to use, again, from feedback from our advisory group and partners, just so that we could kind of cast a wide net to be able to get responses from any folks that are growing crops or raising livestock in the urban and the suburban areas. So we received a total of 78 responses to the survey. 1 was in Spanish, 2 were in Burmese, 5 were in Ukrainian, 24 were in Karen, and then 46 were in English. And then who completed the survey? So I mentioned about the responses a little bit. We didn't require respondents to provide their demographic information, but 72 of the 78 did. So we did get a pretty good response rate there. For gender and age, there was 38 females, 32 males, and then 2 folks who identified as non-binary, third gender, or preferred to describe their gender. In regards to age, we had a really wide range of responses. Most of the respondents were in that 34 to 48 years of age category. The first set of questions in the survey was really geared to kind of understand what the farmers and the gardeners were doing currently, and then also to get a little bit of understanding of what their previous production experience was. So we learned that 60% of the respondents were currently growing crops or raising livestock, or they had previous experience doing so. 78% of the respondents did live in Utica currently, and 6% lived in Rome. And then the rest were kind of in sporadically through the surrounding area, but within 10 miles of kind of the city limits. Respondents kind of indicated that they were currently producing a really wide variety of products. Mostly fruits and vegetables were the most common, but really a wide variety there. And then one thing that we got from the survey too is that they were all producing right in their own backyards. So versus farming in community spaces or in land that they rented, possibly like outside of their neighborhood or in more rural settings. So they're growing right in their backyards in raised beds or directly into the ground. When we asked them what kind of their primary purpose was for growing crops or raising livestock, 42%. So the majority did indicate that they were farming to feed themselves or their families or their community. So that was the overwhelming kind of main purpose versus like producing for income. 30 of the respondents also had been growing for more than 5 years. So significant hands-on experience in production. So after we learned a little bit about, what they're currently doing or what they've done before, we asked, of course, about what their future land needs look like. And 56 of the respondents, so over 70%, are interested in getting additional land for farming or gardening purposes. They were all looking for parcels that were under 5 acres or less in size. So 63% wanted smaller parcels. Most of them wanted to stay in Utica. There was a really strong desire to be within walking distance of their current location. But they would consider going 5 to 10 miles outside of the city or within a 5 to 10 mile radius from the city. And one thing that was kind of important to note is that in part of the demographics, we did ask respondents to answer if they own their own homes or if they rented or, what their kind of housing situation was. And almost all of the respondents currently own their own homes. So that kind of alludes to the fact that they're wanting to stay in Utica or close by because they're already, living in that community. And when we asked what they, wanted to do with more land, keep growing more, grow more of what they were currently growing, grow more varieties. That was kind of what they were hoping to do. But then the important thing to note is just that if they were able to secure more access to land, 53%, so over half of the respondents did indicate that they would want to generate at least a portion of their income from the farm. So they really need to be able to access more land to be able to get an income from that. But they would also continue to feed their families and feed their communities because that's kind of what their core value was. So, Molly touched on these a little bit, but directly from the survey, we asked, what some of the challenges they faced when accessing land was. A lot of these are very similar to what the farmers that are producing in more rural areas were experiencing. But there were a couple that were more specific to these urban farmers. The couple of things that I'll mention is just that, finding affordable land that relates to people in the city as well. But then kind of the couple of extra things for these urban farmers was just finding land that already had access to adequate water for irrigation. And also that had good soils that were contaminant free. It was kind of mentioned to us through a few different local sources that, there is some lead in the soils issues in Utica and Rome. So that was a concern too for some of the people that completed the survey. The second part was just that zoning codes were a bit difficult for some of the respondents to understand. And that they had a hard time kind of like navigating those. They found some conflicting answers on what could be produced, specifically when it came to like honeybees and poultry production. And then the third was just that access to education or support that was in languages other than English was very difficult to find. 31 of the survey respondents did indicate that English was not their first language. And so they're coming from, cultures outside of the United States where production and agriculture looks very different. So then they come to New York where we have, 4 seasons that are wonderful, but they don't necessarily know how to produce here. And then I just included a link, or excuse me, a quote here that I thought was really great from the survey. This was someone just saying, I need more land, I desire education, and I'd love to meet with other urban gardeners to share my experience. So this kind of just alludes to all the things that I just said in terms of what are some of the challenges for the future. So some of our key takeaways from the survey was that the residents of Utica really have a strong need and desire to remain in their community and producing for their community. The second is that, they're really looking for small parcels or, wanting to be within a short driving distance of Utica. Farming and gardening for profit is really only feasible if they have more access to land. Cooperative land use, I think I might have skipped over this part, sorry about that. But then cooperative land use and sharing land with others is their primary interest versus the more traditional like owning or leasing land. So there was really this interest in using land cooperatively with their community. And then the last was just that education and resources on how to farm in New York climate is really needed in other languages. So I mentioned that we also had these community listening sessions. These were held, in addition to the survey so that we could kind of hear directly from the people in these communities. We held 4 listening sessions in Utica and Rome. The sessions were kind of designed to gather more information, again, about the needs and the challenges faced by urban farmers and gardeners. It was kind of, we let it be an informal conversation between participants. We did have, a series of questions that we asked to kind of get the conversation flowing. Over these 4 sessions, we had over 71 attendees. So we had really great participation at all of these. Much of the conversation during the sessions really reflected, everything I've mentioned in the Urban Farmer and Gardener survey in regards to challenges and their primary production goals. However, the learning session that we listening session that we held at the center in Utica really brought to attention some of the challenges that were faced by new American and refugee farmers. They really highlighted challenges related to immigration, adjusting to the new climate and growing season, language accessibility of programs, safety in rural spaces, and then just limited familiarity with methods of how we access land in the United States. So now I'm going to turn it over to an urban farmer that we connected with through this program. And I'm really pleased to introduce you all to James Paul of Black Acres Inc. and Black Roots LLC.
You're muted, James.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for that. Molly, Alex, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. It's been a great journey. I started this out trying to seek some help for the community. So currently I'm located in Utica. I'm a school board member. So I understand the diversity. We've got the most diverse school district from a student body standpoint in the state. So there's over 40 languages spoken in this school district. But I started this journey because I know that there's a need for agriculture. And because we live in upstate New York, those community gardens are seasonal. So I came across an opportunity to look at a project called Freight Farms. It's a hydroponic shipping container, but it's engineered and built out to produce produce year round. So as I'm going down that road, I meet Mary Ellen Baldwin from Cornell Cooperative Extension, our local chapter here in Oneida County. She's on the Zoom here, and we start talking, kind of just brainstorming. And I started an LLC. That's the route I'm going to go. Black Roots is my LLC, but she introduces me to Molly and the Urban Agriculture group, the advisory group. So I joined that, and because of the responses from the survey, it kind of changed my view. So I started a nonprofit, and that nonprofit is going to be an urban container farm right here in Cornell, in the most diverse kind of neighborhood of the city here. But I wanted it to be local. I wanted it to be where that underrepresented population has access to it. Put it on one of the main roads where they can come there, they can get fresh produce year round. There was a mention about the contaminants in the soil. We do have a lead problem here. Because we're growing hydroponically, I don't have to worry about the lead contaminants from the soil. But as I'm going down this, this process, I was invited to work with Pace University. So thank you for being on the call, Professor Brown. I see you on there, Jonathan Brown. So they were a great help. How you doing? Great help in helping me form my nonprofit. He had two of his students there work this spring to get that done, and I formed my nonprofit back in April thanks to the help from Pace University. And then after talking, just looking at some of the struggles we're having with some of the zoning challenges, there's no place here in the city of Utica that's actually zoned agriculture. So any place you want to grow, you have to get a variance from the city, and that's something that we need to change. Access to capital is something that we struggle with, especially from a startup. You have to look at donors that aren't willing to invest in infrastructure. And then if you're a startup, it's kind of hard to get funding from banks as well. Lenders don't want to really touch that. And the USDA unfortunately has been reprimanded, so to speak, because they are so against, I guess, there's discrimination there, and it's actually documented when it comes to urban farmers and farmers of color. So I reached out to Marianne Buttonshawn, our local assemblywoman, and she's willing to further the conversation to really look at how we can get this going off, here in the city of Utica. The good thing about it is people have really received this well. They understand the need. They understand why I want to do it. I want to do this right in Cornell, where our SNAP benefit recipients can actually purchase the farm through purchase the produce rather through a program with New York State that allows them to buy farm fresh produce from farmers. But I can do this year round, and there's no seasonality to it. It doesn't end when the snow falls. Those recipients can get those fresh vegetables all year long. Something that's going to help me get this off the ground is this program called Mohawk Valley Gives. It's a 24-hour day of giving that's local here. It's through the Community Foundation. You can donate to the farm to kind of seed money to help get this off the ground. Go to www.blackacres, that's BLACQUE, acres.org. I've left that in the chat, but this has been a phenomenal opportunity. It's going to be a great opportunity for this community to really get some of the vegetables that they're used to growing at home in their native land, because we can grow over 600 different vegetables in this container, and we can take the input from our local residents to help build community. So I just want to thank you for your time. I appreciate everything that this has done, because we're going to make some changes here in the community, and it's all because people like you guys have come together and said that we're going to work on doing that. So thanks.
Thanks, James. All right, so then I'm gonna jump into objective 2. So again, Molly mentioned that the objective was to identify priority farmland areas to support urban farmers and gardener land needs. So we heard from the farmers, now we're trying to figure out what the land looks like. Again, we use kind of 2 methods to do this. The first was we created a series of maps using GIS data. Molly showed a couple of those maps earlier that were more of a broader look at Oneida County. And then our team did kind of dive into the specific cities too, and they used some information to kind of determine what parcels had potential for urban farming and gardening. We kind of use zoning information to make this determination. So if it was zoned for active agriculture, if it was abandoned or vacant agricultural land, vacant land codes, public parks, community service spaces, like churches, libraries, or if it was a residential lot that had potential open space. Those were kind of the determinations that we used. And we did get this tax parcel data from an advisory group member who was on the Oneida County Planning Department. So the map that is on this slide does show the parcels with potential for farming and gardening around Utica. And I'm sorry, I know that they're probably a little bit tough to read on the slide, but they will be in our opportunity assessment that's going to be, published very soon. So this slide shows the parcels that are around Rome. And the dark red line indicates a 2-mile radius around the city. So we chose the 2-mile radius based on the respondents from the Farmer and Gardener survey. And then, to refresh your memory, just that they wanted to be ideally as close to the cities as possible. So that's why we chose 2 miles to look at. So this data was used to create the maps. And then we also used this data for outreach for our second method, which was to survey the landowners. So the Oneida County Landowner Survey, again, was created just to understand the characteristics of the land that is available for farm and gardeners and determine, are landowners actually interested in making their land available to urban-based farmers and gardeners. Again, the survey was in paper and electronic, so available online. We did do a mailing for this survey, so we mailed it to all the landowners that we had the addresses for from that tax parcel information. So that was during the mapping phase. We got that information and we mailed it out. We received a total of 41 responses. 38 were in English and 3 were in Karen. We did translate this survey. We only translated it into Burmese, Karen, and Spanish, partially because of that's what we got really good responses from in the Farmer and Gardener survey. We also got feedback from community members, the advisory group, that these were the communities that were a little bit more established and would possibly be owning land in the community. So that's why we chose that language, those languages. Who completed the survey? So again, demographics questions were not required. We did get 34 responses that provided this information. We had a pretty good split between male and female, gender-wise, and then the responses in terms of race and ethnicity, we had 85% that were white or Caucasian. So vast majority, again, being white or Caucasian landowners, and 72% were over the age of 55. So the first series of questions in the survey were geared towards kind of understanding the characteristics of the properties. Half of the landowners own property that was within a 10-mile radius of Utica, so pretty close to the city. They own properties that were various sizes. So we had some properties that were less than an acre, and then we had properties that were well over 100 acres that were included in the survey. Nearly all of them, so 89%, were held in private ownership. So they weren't held in like a legal or family trust or a business corporation. Most were just held in private ownership. Over half of these properties were currently being used for farming or gardening purposes. And 16 of the landowners did indicate that they had some land that was unoccupied or unused. Oh, and then I did just want to mention too that we did ask if any of the property was conserved or not, and 2 landowners did indicate that they had their property protected in perpetuity by conservation easements. The next series of questions in the landowner survey was just to gauge landowners' interest in making their land available. So we know that they do have property. Some of them have unused land. Do they want to make it available? 16 landowners indicated they would be interested. All 16 of them were interested in leases in some capacity. 12 of the landowners were interested in exploring more of like a business partnership or a cooperative land use situation. And then 7 did indicate an interest in possibly selling some of their property. When we asked, how many acres they would like to make available via a lease, a sale, other arrangement, the interest was in 10 acres or less they would make available. So that kind of matches with what we, learned that the farmers and gardeners were looking for. In exchange for land use, respondents did prefer cash payments to be paid for use of their land. they were really looking to kind of reduce their overall tax burden. Some had an interest in qualifying for the New York State Agricultural Assessment, which would reduce their tax burden as well. And then there was also just an interest in forms of goods and services being paid that way. We did ask landowners if they would be comfortable leasing their land to farmers who did not speak English as their first language. So New American Refugees farmers. 11 landowners did indicate that they were comfortable or would be willing to explore this option if they had support from service providers like the center or the Cornell Cooperative Extension Office. And then to kind of wrap up what we learned from this survey, I just want to share some stats with you all from the 2017 USDA census. So according to this census, 1/3 of New York farmers are over 65 and they own or operate 2 million acres of farmland. This land is at risk of being lost to development and lost forever unless it changes hands to a new generation. The census also showed us that 99% of farmers in New York identify as white or Caucasian. So while many of the landowners that did complete the survey are not farming the land themselves, so they're what we call non-operators in the agricultural world, 47% were over the age of 65. So that really does indicate that there's an opportunity for continued work on this project, that there's a really clear need to kind of educate landowners on transition plans and hopefully get that land into the hands of a new and diverse generation of farmers. So I'm going to end there, and then I know we'll have time for questions at the end, but I'll turn it over to the policy team to dive into their part of the project.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Perry, and I'm the New York Policy Manager at AFT. I'm joined by my colleague, Ali Rexon, who's the AFT Policy Coordinator. Sorry, the New York Policy Coordinator. That's your title. And we'll be running through some policy recommendations given the surveys that Alex just went over. So Alex did just mention that we'll have time for questions. We're actually running up on time. So we're going to fly through our policy recommendations and just know that we will be releasing this report. So if you want to dive into those recommendations further, that is one option. But you can also drop your questions in the chat as we go. And if there's time, we'll address them at the end or follow up with you. So to kick off the policy portion of this project, we collaborated with the Land Use Clinic at the Yale School of the Environment. Students from that school developed this fabulous framework for assessing urban agriculture policy, which includes 7 priority areas that are very comprehensive. So those include land access and land tenure, policy plans and regulations, healthy food access, community outreach, education and training, food policy council processes, social equity, and funding. And so this was the basis of how we developed our recommendations. I do want to thank Professor Jessica Basher and students from Pace's School of Law for using this fabulous framework to then dive into the policies and codes, zoning codes for both Utica and Rome. So this framework will be available for public use. It can be used for any municipality. It's a great tool, and we just ask that if anyone does use it for other municipalities, that you please cite the students and the authors of this report and framework accordingly. Next slide. So just to kick us off, I wanted to mention some of the supports that are actually happening at the state level before we get into that hyper-local municipal level. So there was a bill sponsored by Senator Bailey this year, and it passed the Senate, which would establish the Office of Urban Agriculture at the Department of Ag and Markets. Last year, we also saw $1 million in funding for Ag and Markets Urban Farms and Community Gardens grant. And so some of the recommendations we get into, you might say, well, that's a great recommendation, but we really need money in order to accomplish that, and count this as a resource. This is an annual grant program administered through the department. I believe Kendall is on the call and is a fabulous resource for accessing information about that program. So I just wanted to call that out. And I'll turn it over to Ali for the next couple of slides.
Great, thanks, Michaela. If we go to the next slide, we'll zoom in a little more to the county level. So we also surveyed programs already taking place in Oneida County that Rome and Utica can build off of. The first one listed here is the Mohawk Valley Food Action Network and their Food Action Plan. It's a collaborative of stakeholders in the Mohawk Valley that are looking to increase access to healthy foods, encourage food-related business opportunities, and foster a more diverse local food and transportation system. The next one we listed here is the Oneida Herkimer Solid Waste Authority, which offers a countywide composting program. So urban farmers will have access to that for both waste disposal and access to finished compost to enhance any soil-based agriculture initiatives they take on. And then the Cornell Cooperative Extension in Oneida County is an extensive network of service providers that offer technical assistance to farmers and growers, and also education materials for the community, which were both things cited in the survey that urban farmers were looking for. So that's a pretty significant technical asset for supporting urban agriculture initiatives in the county. And if we go to the next slide, we're zooming in even more to existing programming in the cities of Rome and Utica currently. So the Urban Farm Learning Lab is a Cornell Cooperative Extension project. There's workshops and training opportunities hosted there as an educational learning farm. The Utica Public Library has a garden tool collection program, so they rent them out like books. Residents can borrow tools like shovels, wheelbarrows, and more, use them and then return them. And then there's also a variety of additional demonstration farms and community garden projects in the works, like the Edible Forest Garden at White Lion Farms, which demonstrates best practices for urban edible planting. The Utica Community Garden Program allows for personal agriculture on public land. And the One World Garden, led by the Mohawk Valley Resource Center, and Rust to Green initiative, enhance community spaces and also reflect the diversity of the city that James mentioned. And then both Rome and Utica do have farmers markets as well, which offer residents access to fresh local foods. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michaela to get into our policy recommendations.
Thanks, Allie. So if we can jump ahead to the first recommendation. Great, thank you. So our first recommendation is to update the zoning to permit and integrate sustainable urban agriculture. So in the city of Rome, actually, the current zoning permits agricultural activities, and this includes raising chickens in backyards, apiaries for beekeeping, hoop houses, and there are clearly designated agricultural districts. But in the city of Utica, as James mentioned, the current zoning codes actually prohibit both personal and commercial ag use. So I did just want to draw attention. In 2021, there was a report that was produced by the Department of Urban and Economic Development in the city of Utica, and this was funded by NYSERDA, and the update was called the Code Green Zoning Update. And this zoning update would allow for agricultural zoning. And so we really wanted to bring that report back into the light and suggest that officials in Utica revisit that zoning update and consider some of the recommendations in that report to support urban agriculture. And we also wanted to talk a bit about urban agriculture incentive zones, or UAIZs. So these are really a resource used to establish, demarcate, and incentivize production on urban ag sites. So once a parcel is deemed a UAIZ, property owners can actually receive tax reductions for leasing land to urban farmers, as well as other benefits. This is something that's been adopted at the state level in Missouri, California, and Louisiana. And so we wanted to bring that up as a recommendation. And finally, just to mention that we are the American Farmland Trust, and New York State does have a statewide farmland protection program. However, these funds are not generally accessible for urban agriculture projects, and we've been having many conversations about what it would look like to permanently protect parcels of urban land for urban agriculture, and we haven't come yet to any strong conclusions or action items, but that is a conversation that is happening. Next slide, please. So our second recommendation is to make city property available for urban agriculture and community gardens. We saw in the surveys that a lot of folks were really interested in farming on a shared piece of land and interested in community gardens and community growing. One tool we did write about in our recommendations is a natural resource inventory, and we did show you some maps. But an NRI could really be used as a tool to identify pieces of land within each city that would be suitable or available for agriculture. It could look at resources like access to water or soil quality. Soil quality is a little different for urban agriculture, especially for these two cities, because there can be contaminants in the soil. But also urban agriculture does not necessarily rely on the existing soil. So we could have raised beds, rooftop gardens, hydroponics has been talked about a bit in the chat. So an NRI could be helpful, but not absolutely necessary to establish these pieces of land for community gardens. And so we wanted to draw attention to an example in Washington, D.C., which actually requires the mayor to compile a list of vacant lots in the city to use as urban gardens, either through donation or negotiated agreement. And also in Evanston, Illinois, there's a community farming program that could also be a similar model for both Rome or Utica, if there was interest. Next slide, please. Okay, so recommendation 3 was to increase access to water. This is very, very crucial for urban agriculture or any type of agriculture. And we found that both within Rome and Utica, the city codes do not address water access for agriculture. So we have some examples listed here of different programs that do address access to water within cities. And those will be detailed in the report, so I won't waste any time today talking about them, but there are some models out there that could be useful in designing a project for Rome or Utica. Next slide. And recommendation 4 is to establish an urban agriculture liaison role within the city council or a food policy council. Now, this model doesn't necessarily work within every city, and there can be some controversy around a recommendation like this. So we leave it up to both Rome and Utica and the community to decide if this would be right for them. But we did just want to touch on what the benefits of an urban agriculture dedicated position could look like. This person could address issues like food access, nutrition, markets, community gardens, and add capacity within each city to really drive that collaboration between the existing assets and community organizations that are already within Utica and Rome and that Ali touched on earlier. All right, and I'll pass it back to Ali to wrap up the recommendations. Next slide, please.
Great. So for recommendation 5, we wanted to focus on both producers and consumers in Rome and Utica and look at expanding farmers market accessibility. So in Rome, there is the Chestnut Street Farmers Market. It operates from 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. So 3 hours on Wednesdays from May through September. That's pretty limited amount of time for both producers to be able to sell and for consumers to be able to access the market during those hours. So we're recommending expanding hours or looking to a weekend day and also an indoor space so that it could be held year round. And also wanted to highlight that they do not accept SNAP benefits at that farmers market. So we listed some resources for building capacity for that to increase access to those fresh local foods. And then for producers as well, we looked at what are different incentives we could offer at farmers markets. One we thought of is aggregating. So producers could come together under one market space, share the cost of that space, or have waived fees for producers within city limits, and be able to sell collaboratively at one space. And we offered some different resources and examples of farmers markets that are doing these things that Rome and Utica could draw on. And next slide, please. The next recommendation is about expanding local food purchasing at institutions. So this past year, Utica was awarded a $100,000 New York State Farm to School grant to help the school district purchase food from local producers. And so we're recommending that in the future, CCE Oneida County could work with the Rome City School District to apply for similar funding through the New York State Farm to School grant program, so that Rome schools can also have these initiatives. And we also wanted to particularly highlight the example of the Buffalo, New York City schools that work closely with Harvest New York to develop their farm to school program. And they work with a lot of BIPOC farmers to source and cook culturally relevant and local meals in their cafeterias. Like has been mentioned multiple times in this presentation, with the diverse school district populations in Rome and Utica, it's important for students to have access to this culturally relevant food, and also to be introduced to farmers who represent them culturally, racially, and or linguistically. And then our final recommendation, if you go to the next slide, is to keep in mind anti-gentrification measures and policies. So as urban agriculture initiatives gain popularity, there could be concerns about gentrification and displacement of existing communities. And so we surveyed some different policies that work to counter this. We're suggesting that elected officials assess this potential and consider implementing anti-gentrification laws to safeguard vulnerable populations, such as affordable housing provisions that include edible garden space, so the two are in tandem, and community land trusts that can keep housing prices affordable and decision-making in the hands of the community, so that these benefits of urban agriculture are inclusive and accessible to all residents and continue to be. So that was a quick overview of all of our recommendations. I know there's only about 5 minutes now for questions, but happy to open it up to that, and also happy to answer any questions, as Michaela said, via the chat or email, and we'll have the full report with more details as well.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. So Alex, if you'll go to the next slide, just so that folks can have our contact information. So up here, you'll see this is most folks that you heard from today. This is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out and email us if you have any questions about anything you heard today. I just wanted to quickly say that the report is just being finalized and designed right now. So all of the information that we provided today is going to be provided in much more detail in that report. It's about 20 pages long. So there's plenty of good stuff there. When that is released, when it's finalized, we'll send it to everybody who registered for this call and everyone who's on. So don't worry, you'll get an email from us with all that information. It'll include the report itself. It will include the sort of template assessment that the students at Yale created. It'll include Michaela and Allie's policy recommendations, all of that good stuff. So just know that that is coming down the pike in the next couple of weeks as we wrap up this project. And yeah, I don't see any super specific questions about the work that we did in the chat here that haven't been addressed, but feel free to put any more questions in the chat. We've got, like I said, 4 minutes to answer them. So sorry that we don't have more time, but like, as Michaela said, we would be happy to answer questions afterwards, or whenever.
If I could, we were supposed to also launch a poll and we were unable to deploy that. So if you wanted to let us know which of the policy recommendations you found most interesting or most important, and just wanted to either say that out loud or drop it in the chat, we'd also be very curious to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can send out a little poll in our follow-up email just to gauge, see if we get any responses. All righty. Well, it doesn't seem like there are any questions somehow, shockingly. 1 and 2. Okay, great. Love it. We'll save the chat for sure. We'll leave the chat open a little bit, but feel free to hop off. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's really wonderful to see so many people interested in this issue. And like I said, we're going to share lots more information coming soon and hope to kind of continue this work supporting urban-based farmers and gardeners as they're sort of pursuing their farming dreams and making urban agriculture a reality in New York. So thanks everybody, and you'll hear from us very soon.